High school dropout. This is your fault. Take responsibility. Even at this point, Manager Taylor tried to blame everything on me from his high perch. I had enough. I decided I couldn't follow this man any longer, so I made up my mind and replied, "I'll discuss it." "What?" I immediately hung up the phone with Mr. Taylor and called Mr. Johnson, the CEO of our company. By the way, I was recruited by Mr. Johnson, but I've never asked him for a favor or sought his advice. I had my pride. Basically, when I joined the company, I decided to handle everything with my own strength, no matter what happened. But now, I thought I could be forgiven for seeking help after enduring so much. I explained everything to Mr. Johnson and sought his instructions. "Mr. Johnson, what should I do?" "Leave it to me," Mr. Johnson said quietly and hung up. Now, there was no doubt that Mr. Taylor would face a downfall. My name is Alex Smith. Since I was young, I've loved cooking, and now I'm the head of menu development at Epicure Inc. Epicure has dozens of restaurants nationwide and is a mid-sized company in the food service industry. After graduating from middle school, I got a job at a luxury hotel where I honed my cooking skills. I didn't go to high school because I believed academic background didn't matter in cooking. I was so passionate about mastering the culinary arts that I felt even time spent in high school was a waste. If I had a spare moment to learn a Spanish word, I thought it was better spent cooking an omelet. After working at the hotel for about 15 years, I wanted to further improve my cooking skills, so I went to France. I spent 5 years in France and 3 years in Italy before returning to the US. Honestly, since I only graduated from middle school, I couldn't speak much French when I went abroad alone. Looking back, I sometimes thought I should have studied French in high school. But with determination, I managed to learn French and Italian through sheer willpower. Though I've forgotten much of it now, I acquired enough language skills and courage to navigate overseas alone. When I returned to the US, I intended to open my own restaurant. So I sought investors. I considered borrowing from the bank, but I wanted to open a restaurant in a prime location like New York City, which required a significant amount of money. That's when Mr. Johnson from Epicure approached me. "I've heard about you, Alex. You trained abroad for a long time, and your cooking skills are top-notch, right? You want to open a restaurant, but how about working in our development department? I'll pay you well, and I won't object if you want to go independent when the time comes." Mr. Johnson's offer was very appealing, so I decided to join Epicure for the time being. If I could eventually go independent, I could save money while working for the company. Epicure is quite a large company, so I figured its compliance would be solid. However, in big companies, you sometimes encounter unimaginable oddballs. When a group of people reaches a certain size, some strange ones inevitably slip through. One such person was Dan Taylor, the head of the development department. When you come up with a new menu, submit it in handwriting first so I can understand it. If you send it via computer, I'll reject it all, so don't make that mistake. Are you saying you won't accept things made on a computer? Even if I create it on a computer and attach photos, it's the same. I can also attach it to an email, which is convenient, isn't it? I don't understand what you're saying. I don't read emails, so submit it handwritten. You can't create a customer menu on a computer. I couldn't understand what Mr. Taylor was saying. Whether it's created on a computer or handwritten, in the end, it's a person making the food, so there's no difference. Maybe he thought handwritten menus had more heart, but that's ridiculously outdated. Besides, text created on a computer is consistent, clean, and easy to read. Handwriting varies in readability from person to person. Not everyone has beautiful handwriting. I decided to express my concerns to Mr. Taylor. Isn't it inefficient to only accept handwritten menus in this day and age? If you photograph the menu and attach it, it would be easier to visualize, wouldn't it? What? If you have a problem with my method, you can quit. I don't care about your emails or computers, but discussing food with such things won't result in good food. If it's not handwritten, I won't accept it. Mr. Taylor stubbornly stuck to his way. In short, he was just bad with computers. so he insisted on handwritten submissions. Why are you so fixated on handwriting? It's clearly time-consuming and inefficient. Young people only think about efficiency. Listen carefully. For example, if you received a love letter by email and one handwritten, which would you prefer? Mr. Taylor tried to explain with a ridiculously irrelevant example. A love letter? I'd be happy with either. Fool. Of course, a handwritten one is better. Haven't you ever received a love letter? Talking to someone who doesn't get any is difficult. Sure, receiving a love letter, I'd be happy with either. While I wasn't exceptionally popular, I was married. And frankly, Mr. Taylor, who seemed less popular than me, had no room to talk. That might be true, but we're discussing work communication. I can't agree if you compare it to a love letter. No excuses. In my day, sending menus to a superior by computer was unthinkable. Only handwritten, carefully written menus are accepted. In the end, it was decided that new menus would be submitted handwritten, as Mr. Taylor decreed. Honestly, at that moment, I deeply regretted joining this company. The things Mr. Taylor says are awful, right? We should use the tools we have. She's Emily White, a colleague from the development department and the top young female employee. I can't believe we have to handwrite our menu proposals. It's shocking. Without a sense of speed, we're gonna fall behind other companies. Exactly. Even if Alex comes up with a menu that could sell, if we don't act quickly, it might not sell at all. It's really frustrating. Apparently, I'm not the only one who's mad at Mr. Taylor. Knowing that helps reduce my stress a bit. I vent my stress by complaining about Mr. Taylor's tyranny with my colleagues. However, Mr. Taylor had something to say that added even more stress. We're going to have a TV station interview us soon. So by then, you need to come up with at least 10 new menu items. The more, the better. When is this TV interview? In 2 months. You absolutely need to have 10 new items by then. There's no way we can come up with 10 new menu items in 2 months. And we have to handwrite all of them? At least for those 10. Can we create them on the computer and email them? Coming up with 10 new menu items in 2 months is unrealistic. And demanding that we submit them handwritten is just too much. I saw this as an opportunity to propose we submit them digitally. Don't be ridiculous. What are you saying in the midst of this? At times like this, you need to carefully think through the menu. Submit the new menu items to me, handwritten and done properly. Unbelievable. Even when we're under pressure, it doesn't seem to matter to Mr. Taylor. That's impossible. We've never come up with 10 new menu items in 2 months before. Saying it's impossible before you even try shows a lack of spirit. If you're motivated, you can do it. Stay overnight if you have to. Mr. Taylor says this lightly, as if it's none of his concern. If we really had to stay overnight every day, it could lead to a lawsuit. Of course, Mr. Taylor will leave at the regular time. He's lenient on himself, but extremely strict with his subordinates. Got it. It's a waste of time to argue, so I'll start thinking about the menus. I need to come up with 10, right? At least 10. If you can't even come up with 10, your evaluation will be the lowest. It can take several months to come up with one menu item, but Mr. Taylor says it casually. However, if I insist it's impossible, he might mock me, so I can't say I can't do it. Got it. I'll come up with at least 10 new menu items. Good. If you can't, it's all your fault, so I'm counting on you. What a terrible boss. He imposes unreasonable demands on his subordinates and shifts the responsibility. But at this point, there's no choice but to do it. I started working on developing the new menus that day. Though I put on a brave face, coming up with 10 new items in 2 months is really tough. 4 weeks in, I had only proposed 2 new menu items. Hey, at this rate, you'll only come up with 4 new menu items in 2 months. You won't make it. If you don't, you'll really have to take responsibility. Since this is a project for the whole development department, normally the boss would also need to take responsibility. No, it's only natural that the boss should bear full responsibility. But Mr. Taylor seems to have no intention of that. He's probably planning to shift all the blame to me and claim he had no responsibility. Normally, that wouldn't fly, but Mr. Taylor is very good at sucking up to his superiors, despite being harsh on his subordinates. Because of that, he's very well liked by the executive director. That's why he can get away with such extreme behavior without any problems. If he insists he has no responsibility, there's a good chance it'll be accepted. If all the blame is placed on me, I might really get fired. Resigning on my own is one thing, but taking responsibility for Mr. Taylor's actions is out of the question. I had no choice but to use the menus I had developed for my own future restaurant for this project. I had 20 original menu items, so by submitting half of them, I could manage. But these were meant to be the signature dishes for my own restaurant, so it was a painful decision. The next day, I submitted the 10 new menu items to Mr. Taylor. Here you go. These are the documents for the new menu items I created. Please check them. I'm confident they'll boost sales when the TV crew comes. You came up with 10 new items this quickly? Yesterday, you only had 2. Oh, I see. You must have plagiarized some menu items from somewhere. Plagiarism? No way. I've decided to reveal the menu ideas I've been working on for years for this project. So, there's absolutely no plagiarism involved. But Mr. Taylor looked at me with suspicion. Really? You're a high school dropout, right? People like you lack morals, so I can't trust anything you say. Mr. Taylor made an unbelievable remark, smirking all the while. Saying that I'd plagiarized just because I'm a dropout is unfair. I was so frustrated that this was all I could say. However, Mr. Taylor didn't actually believe it was plagiarism, he just wanted to belittle me. I found out from a colleague that he took the menus I submitted to the executive director, bragging that he had come up with them himself. I was boiling with anger at his utter selfishness. It felt like my carefully nurtured menu ideas had been tainted. 2 weeks later, I was called by Mr. Taylor. I'd never had a positive experience being summoned by him, so I was wary, but his words were unexpected. The recent TV interview was a huge success thanks to you. I can't thank you enough. As expected of the ace of the development department, I couldn't believe my ears hearing words of gratitude from Mr. Taylor. Thank you. It's hard to believe Mr. Taylor is praising me. I'm really happy. That said, I have a new job for you. There's a new restaurant opening in the neighboring state, and I want you to help out there. It's unheard of for someone from the main development department to assist at a restaurant. This was clearly a form of harassment from Mr. Taylor. I hesitated, but was eventually pushed into helping out at the restaurant. I had to commute an hour and a half by train every day. It was clear Mr. Taylor wanted to make me quit. While I wouldn't mind quitting, my pride wouldn't allow me to leave on his terms. So, I continued commuting to the restaurant. A month later, Mr. Taylor suddenly showed up at the restaurant. It was unusual for the development department head to visit a restaurant without a significant reason. Mr. Taylor, what brings you here so suddenly? Do you have business at this restaurant? No, I was in the area and decided to drop by. I was worried a high school dropout like you might be slacking off. Dropouts tend to slack off, don't they? I see. If that's all, please leave soon. Having someone unrelated to the staff in the kitchen is a major hindrance and disrupts our work. Mr. Taylor's reason for visiting was so disrespectful that I responded coldly. He seemed offended and refused to leave, lighting a cigarette right there. Smoking in the kitchen was absolutely unacceptable. Please don't smoke in the kitchen. This restaurant is entirely non-smoking. We've asked our customers to refrain, so there's no way management should be smoking. Don't sweat the small stuff. I decide whether it's okay to smoke or not. Is there anyone here higher ranked than me? No? Then I'm like the law here. It was utterly nonsensical. Mr. Taylor even threw his cigarette butt on the ground when he finished. What are you doing? You can't just throw cigarette butts around. It's not acceptable even outside. Shut up, drop out. Well, I'm bored now, so I'll be leaving. Laughing, Mr. Taylor walked away. I was relieved, but the problem wasn't over. One of the cigarette butts Mr. Taylor had discarded ended up in a customer's dish. The staff didn't notice and served it to the customer, which caused a huge commotion. Worse yet, the customer posted a photo of it on social media, leading to complaints to the head office. Even Mr. Taylor realized this was bad and called the restaurant. "Drop out. This is your fault. Take responsibility." Even now, Mr. Taylor tried to pin the blame on me from his high horse. I've had enough. I decided I couldn't work under this man any longer. I'll look into it. What? I immediately hung up on Mr. Taylor and called Mr. Johnson, the CEO. I had been scouted by Mr. Johnson to join the company, but I had never asked him for a favor or confided in him about any problems. I had my pride. When I joined, I intended to handle any issues on my own. But after enduring this much, I felt justified. I told Mr. Johnson everything that had happened and asked for his guidance. "What should I do, Mr. Johnson?" "Leave it to me," he said quietly and hung up. There's no doubt Mr. Taylor is going to fall from grace now. After that, Mr. Taylor repeatedly called the restaurant, but I instructed the staff not to connect his calls to me. I had no obligation to talk to him, and I trusted Mr. Johnson to handle the situation appropriately. Soon, Mr. Johnson contacted me again. "I want to discuss the repercussions of this incident. Come to the head office tomorrow." "I don't doubt your word, but I want to hear everything accurately." "Understood. I'll report to the head office tomorrow." The next morning, I went to the head office. As soon as Mr. Taylor saw me, he stormed over furiously. "Hey, why didn't you answer my calls? And who were you planning to consult with? I'm your boss. You should consult with me first. How could I consult you about what you did to me? Wake up. If I consulted you, you'd twist things in your favor and report it your way." I let it all out at once. Mr. Taylor was momentarily stunned by my intensity, but soon his anger returned, and he got in my face again, shouting, "You insolent brat! How dare you speak to your superior like that? This is why dropouts like you are no better than thugs. It's your fault for putting cigarette butts in customers' food. What are you talking about? You're the one who did it. Trying to pin it on me won't work. Who do you think people will believe? A dropout who's been here a short time, or me, a college graduate who's contributed far more to this company? Don't underestimate me." Mr. Taylor was shockingly confident, thinking he could shift the blame to me without evidence. As I was about to respond, the CEO's secretary appeared. "The CEO wants to see you. Please come to his office." "Understood. I'll be right there." "Mr. Taylor, you're also requested to come." Mr. Taylor looked a bit uneasy, not expecting to be summoned as well. But he couldn't refuse. "Me too." "All right. Maybe the CEO wants to hear about your mistake from me. You might be getting fired." He seemed to believe the CEO didn't know about his wrongdoing and that he was being called because of my supposed mistake. Unfortunately for him, he's about to face his downfall. I was eager to witness Mr. Taylor's demise firsthand. I expected only the CEO to be in the office, but the entire management team was there: CEO, vice CEO, and executive director. Seeing this, Mr. Taylor looked visibly nervous. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." "No problem, sir." "Thank you. We called you here because we need to get to the bottom of the cigarette butt incident in the restaurant's food. It's causing quite a stir on social media. In today's world, bad reviews on social media can ruin a company." Mr. Taylor, not tech-savvy, seemed shocked by how serious it was, his face turning pale. He was probably more determined than ever to pin the blame on me. "I want to make it clear that Mr. Taylor, who is here, was the one who put the cigarette butt in the food," I said. Mr. Taylor was visibly shaken, not expecting me to state the truth so bluntly. But he couldn't back down and bit his lip, trying to assert his innocence. "Ridiculous. Why would I even be at that restaurant? I've never set foot in the place you're helping at. Are you trying to pin your mistake on me?" I was shocked that he was now claiming he'd never been to the restaurant. Sure, if he'd never been there, he couldn't be responsible for the cigarette butt. But that was far-fetched. "Mr. Taylor, multiple employees saw you at the restaurant. Saying you've never been there is an obvious lie. There's no way that will fly. Most of the staff at your restaurant are part-timers. They wouldn't recognize someone from the head office development team. You're trying to frame me, but it won't work. That cigarette butt was yours. He finally outright accused me of smoking the cigarette. For the record, I've never smoked in my life. Not only because it's bad for your health, but because as a chef, I can't afford to dull my sense of taste. Blaming me for smoking was absurd. I don't smoke, never have. It's crazy to say that cigarette butt was mine. Dropouts all smoke. Stop trying to cover it up. Mr. Taylor had a prejudiced view that all high school dropouts smoke. Of course, that's a ridiculous stereotype. There's no point in continuing this blame game. I needed definitive proof. By the way, are you aware that the restaurant has security cameras? Of course, that's obvious. Every store has cameras at the entrances and exits for security reasons. Trying to scare me with that won't work. Mr. Taylor is so confident because he thinks he's not caught on the security cameras since he entered the kitchen from the back door. However, his confidence froze when he heard my next words. No, that's not it. There's a camera in the kitchen. It's a special installation for that store. So no matter how much you deny it, we've got evidence. Recently, a series of burglaries in neighboring restaurants prompted us to install additional cameras. Since the office is right next to the kitchen, there's a camera to monitor the office entrance, which also captures the kitchen area. Although it doesn't cover the entire kitchen, Mr. Taylor is clearly visible on the footage with a cigarette in his mouth. This is undeniable evidence. Mr. Taylor, we've already seen the footage of you smoking in the kitchen. I was curious about what excuse you'd make, but blaming someone else. We know Alex doesn't smoke. I admit, I was at the restaurant since I was nearby. But there's no proof that the cigarette butt in the food is mine. It could have been someone else's. Even faced with this decisive evidence, Mr. Taylor continues to make excuses. Unfortunately, that's not possible. That restaurant is completely non-smoking, and they don't hire any smokers. So, it's not possible that someone else smoked there. Even if I didn't smoke, it's possible to plant a cigarette butt, right? I was framed. It's a setup by Alex, who holds a grudge against me. If you want to accuse me, provide more concrete evidence. Mr. Taylor's desperate attempts to proclaim his innocence are almost laughable. Enough. This is disgraceful. With all this evidence, your refusal to admit the truth is pathetic. If you want more proof, we'll do a DNA test on the cigarette butt. What? Isn't that going too far? Hearing the words DNA test, Mr. Taylor became visibly deflated. No wonder. Frankly, the evidence we have now already makes it 99% certain that Mr. Taylor is the culprit. He knows it too. But since it's all circumstantial, he was holding out as long as possible. If a DNA test is done, he can't escape. DNA testing is decisive evidence, even in court. What will you do? If you don't admit it, I'm gonna do a DNA test. If you insist on more proof, we'll spend the money. And if it turns out to be your cigarette butt, you'll have to cover the cost of the test. Hearing this, Mr. Taylor finally admitted his guilt. I'm sorry. I think it's my cigarette butt. I'm really sorry. If you'd admitted it sooner, I'd have felt differently. Admitting it only when you can't escape doesn't count. Frankly, I'm disappointed in you. Expect to be fired. I'm disappointed too. I liked you and supported you, but that's over now. Even if you're told you're being fired, I have to agree. Mr. Taylor was finally disowned by the executive who had treated him the best. This seemed to hit him hard, as his eyes filled with tears, on the verge of crying. Then he suddenly got on his knees and begged the CEO. Please forgive me. Yes, the cigarette butt is mine, but please give me another chance. I won't make the same mistake again. Please. I'm not firing you just for this incident. You know what else you've done, don't you? You've done some pretty terrible things, haven't you? What? I don't know what you mean. This response from Mr. Taylor was likely genuine. There were just too many things he had done wrong for him to pinpoint one. Don't play dumb. This conversation is going nowhere. If you don't reflect, you can't improve. No, that's not it. Maybe you're talking about the time I charged a family meal to the company expenses. So you did that too. You're completely finished. Mr. Taylor dug his own grave by confessing to something the CEO didn't even know about. Watching from the sidelines, it was hard not to laugh at how pathetic he was. Or are you referring to using the company car for personal use and saving on gas money? You did that too. If we investigate, we might uncover a lot of misconduct. We'll thoroughly investigate, and if the company has lost money, you'll repay it all. But I told the truth. Please forgive me. Mr. Taylor continued to confess his wrongdoings. Each one met with more disappointment from the higher-ups. I was shocked to hear things I didn't even know about, reinforcing how corrupt he was. Mr. Taylor, no matter how much you make excuses, it's too late. Even a high school dropout like me can see that. You might want to start thinking about what you'll do after leaving the company. Lastly, I delivered the final blow to Mr. Taylor. With that, I felt a sense of relief. Now, I'll leave his punishment to Mr. Johnson and the others. The meeting ended, and I immediately left the room. However, Mr. Taylor stayed behind and was grilled by the executives for the next 2 hours. In the end, Mr. Taylor was fired on the spot. Misusing company funds and treating company property as his own led to a significant reduction in his severance pay. This resulted in a huge fight with his wife, and they are now separated. His wife wants a divorce, but since Mr. Taylor never did any housework, he can't manage without her and refuses to agree. No matter how much Mr. Taylor resists, if the separation continues, a divorce is inevitable. He will likely spend his old age alone and miserable. Even though I brought Mr. Taylor down this time, I realized I need to keep my own actions in check and live properly. Since Mr. Taylor left, the atmosphere in the development department has greatly improved. It's almost hard to believe it's the same company. Many people probably couldn't express their opinions before. Recently, I heard some colleagues, who still hold grudges against Mr. Taylor for his actions, are considering suing him for damages. And it's not just 1 or 2 people. If it goes to court, Mr. Taylor, who doesn't have much money, will likely go bankrupt. But this is a consequence of his own actions. If he does get sued, I hope he handles it with honesty. As for me, this whole fiasco led to a discussion with Mr. Johnson, and I ended up going independent. Mr. Johnson sympathized with my situation and offered to fund most of the capital if I wanted to open my own store. Originally, I joined the company just to save money. So, if Mr. Johnson could solve that problem, I had no choice but to go independent, turning misfortune into fortune. Now, I have a store in a prime location in New York. Honestly, if it weren't for Mr. Johnson's financial support, I wouldn't have been able to open a store in such a great location. In hindsight, maybe I should thank Mr. Taylor. If it weren't for him, Mr. Johnson wouldn't have helped me this much. Here I am again today. After Mr. Taylor and I left, Emily rose to become the head of the development department and frequently visits my store with her team. Her visits significantly boost my sales, making me grateful for my time at Epicure. If I ever quit the company, please hire me here. She says it jokingly, but as far as I'm concerned, an employee as talented as her would always be welcome. My store is doing well at the moment. However, if I let success get to my head and start looking down on my employees, I'll end up like Mr. Taylor. I intend to keep that in mind and live with my feet firmly on the ground.